Pardon me?
Did you get your
I can't.
Welcome. Welcome. And for those who want to sign up to speak at an item, I think everybody knows, but just in case, there's little sign-in cards there to fill out which item you want to speak at, and you can hand them to the clerk. Okay, great. And Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll, that'd be great. Thank you.
Andrew.
Present.
Hayward.
Here.
Dublin. Here. Livermore. Here. Fremont.
Here.
Emeryville. Here. Oakland.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I called Berkeley.
You were second.
Community Advisory Committee.
Yeah, excellent. And in a few months, we'll be adding a few more names of cities, but for now, this is great. And will the gentleman from Fremont like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
This is from Sunday.
Okay. Just to call everybody's attention, I'm going to take something a little bit out of order on the agenda. Between items 10 and 11, we will move item 16. So it'll be 8, 9, 10, 16, 11, 12, 13, and so on. Madam Clerk, did you get that?
8, 9, 10.
16. Yeah. And there may be some agendas and other documents at the back of the room. Okay, and now is time for general public comment on items that are not on our agenda tonight, but that may relate to the EBCE purview. And I believe I see one person here, Tom Kelly. Come on up.
Sorry for the Thank you. Tom Kelly, Kyoto, USA. I just wanted to know when we can expect the integrated resource plan. Marine Clean Energy just issued their 2020 plan. We're still operating on our 2018 plan. I know it's in the works, but very interested in knowing when we might see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a quick answer to that, Nick?
We are in the process of doing our technical evaluation, so it's due to the Public Utilities Commission in May. So I would expect that we would have, the initial draft sort of in that February-March timeframe for board review.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Attorney, do you need to report anything to not report anything?
Sorry. That's correct. There are no reportable items.
From closed session. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Scott, sorry. Now we have our consent item. We have 3 items on our consent calendar. Unless anybody wants to pull anything off or has any questions, I'll entertain a motion. I don't think that, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I do have one person on item 8 to speak. So are there any questions from the dais here on the consent calendar or comments? Seeing none, we'll call the public speaker, and that will be Tom Kelly on item 8.
Thank you, Tom Kelly. I had a question on the amended, it's 8C, the amend rate setting protocol, because I didn't actually understand how that fit into A and B. It seemed to me, kind of stuck out there on its own. And I was hoping that we could get some kind of clarification on that. Now, the reason that I ask, and I'm sorry for there's a comment in there under the rates that just didn't make any, rate setting that didn't make any sense to me at all. Had something to do with the fact that staff can't modify the rates if PG&E's rates go down. They don't have that power. They can increase them if PG&E's rates go up, but they can't reduce them or adjust them if the rates go down. And so I wanted to ask if that was like a typo, or if there's actually some prohibition on staff passing on any kind of price benefits to customers. And we do actually have one example of that right now, and that is that EBCE's Renewable 100 product is actually more expensive than PG&E right now. Not by much, but about 1/3 of a cent. And it seems to me like the residents of Piedmont, for example, who are enrolled in the 100% renewable program should be getting the benefit of a cheaper price. So anyway, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Our CEO, is there a quick answer to that question about being able to go up but not down at the staff level? Or is that something we might revisit later?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So the rate modification, this is authorized to not adjust the rates. So what it says is that staff is authorized to adjust the rates to maintain the value proposition, but staff is authorized to not adjust the rates if PG&E's rates go down. So it's not a matter of not being able to, but it's not being required.
Thank you for that clarification. Colleagues, any other comments or questions on any of the 3 items on the consent calendar? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Who was that?
Second.
Vinny, and who was seconding? Okay, Melissa, and that's all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, that's adopted unanimously of all those present. And we'll go on to item 9, I'm sorry, CEO report.
Okay, so this first quick reports out on our 2 subcommittees and our executive committee. We did not have subcommittee meetings in November. I think that largely just reflects the fact that we had the Thanksgiving holiday, and there were a lot of other meetings, and so we did not schedule those meetings. Those will, I believe, recommence in the beginning of 2020. We did have an executive committee meeting on the 22nd of November. The focus of that was a discussion on the allocation of carbon-free energy from PG&E, and the direction to staff was to come back with a recommendation at a future date. We do have this item on today's agenda, but does not include a staff recommendation. I think that will be coming at a later date. And then most importantly, and I'm excited to share, we have some new colleagues with us who are each here. So first, I'd like to introduce Zach Thompson. Zach, please stand up. So Zach has joined our local development team. He joined on the 25th of November as a Distributed Energy Resources Program Associate. Zach assists with EBCE's transportation electrification and local solar and storage initiatives to provide benefits to residents and businesses and increase resiliency in Alameda County. Prior to EBC, Zach served as the zero-emission vehicle analyst at the City and County of San Francisco's Department of Environment, where he helped to lead the development of the city's electric vehicle-ready community blueprint. He assisted in coordinating a public-private EV working group and succeeded in acquiring grant funding for medium and heavy-duty EV pilot projects. Zach has a bachelor's in arts in biology from San Francisco State University. So welcome, Zach. Great to have you on the team. Next, I'd like to introduce Becky Menton, who's our program manager for building electrification and energy efficiency. So another member of our local development team. We're really building that group up to start scaling up our local development activities. Becky joined EBCE on November 2nd as a program manager for building electrification and energy efficiency. Becky designs and implements energy efficiency and building electrification programs for the EBCE community. She focuses on programs that conserve energy, maximize the efficient use of renewable energy, and provide important co-benefits to the community. Becky has more than 15 years' experience working on energy conservation and climate change mitigation strategies, including experience at the CPUC, the California Energy Commission, and launching the first set of demand-side management programs offered by a CCA in California during her tenure at MCE. Becky holds an MS in Environment, Technology, and Policy from Humboldt State. Becky, welcome. This is actually Becky's second turn, as I noted, with the CCA. So Becky was one of the early staff, one of the first program staff at MCE, was there for 8 years.
No, I was number 8.
Number 8, employee number 8 at MCE, and now she couldn't stay away from CCA, so she's back, and we're very happy to have her. And then finally, we have Gabrielle Ruxin, who's our customer care coordinator. Gabrielle joined EBC also on November 2nd. Gabrielle's role focuses on providing support to residential customers and assisting with billing analysis. She helps to oversee the call center and resolves issues that arise. Prior to joining EBC, she worked as a Civic Spark Fellow with the city of El Cerrito, where she drafted a strategic energy plan for the city, which included analysis of the city's energy usage and recommendations for increasing efficiency. Most recently, Gabrielle worked at Vital Link Medical Alert Systems, providing customer service and account management to clients. Gabrielle has a BS in Environmental Science from UCLA. Welcome, Gabrielle. Great to have you on the team.
All right, let's welcome Gabrielle, Becky, and Zach. Woo!
Okay.
Nick, is that it?
Yep.
Okay, colleagues, I don't think oh, wait a minute. We do have a speaker, commentator Tom Kelly on item 9. Come on up. Is he still here? Yes. And while he's coming up, thanks. Any questions or comments on any of the elements of the CEO report? Seeing none. Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Tom Kelly. So one of the things I was interested in tonight was getting these other reports. Marketing and outreach, local development business plan update on opt-outs. And normally we get some kind of hard copy attached to the agenda, and I'm wondering if these items are going to be reported on today, and if so, there'll be some kind of paper, attachment to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we already heard that we weren't getting those 2 updates today. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, but next month we'll get another one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, no action on this item. Mary, did you have a question, comment?
Nope.
No, okay. Right. So next we'll go to the Community Advisory Committee report. Mary?
Yep. So the Community Advisory Committee this month spent a fair amount of time on items that are already on the agenda, so I'm not going to go over those. What we did talk about that is not on the current agenda is we worked with staff, or staff presented to us different metrics for one of the newer local development programs on resource adequacy with solar and behind-the-meter batteries. They talked about environmental metrics and economic metrics, and it looked like there was not as much on the societal metric side as the Community Advisory Committee wanted. So we have a member that has offered to go away and kind of look at some of the things that are being used in the county. There is knowledge of other metrics that are actually in use in programs by the Alameda County for other types of programs, and they're going to bring that back to us in January, and then I'll share with you. That's it.
Okay. And you'll have more to share on some of the items coming up.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Colleagues, any questions on that report to the CAC chair? Seeing none, there's no action on that. And so now we're going to move to item 16, as we discussed, as I mentioned earlier. So, item 16, I guess we're going to start with staff report, is that right?
Yep.
And is there a PowerPoint?
There is not.
Okay. No popcorn for anybody.
No
Right.
PowerPoint.
Go ahead.
So the purpose of this memo is really to provide sort of some background and a sense of what the next steps are. As referenced in the CEO report, at the executive committee meeting on November 22nd, there was a presentation given to the board laying out 3 potential options for how an allocation from carbon-free resources from PG&E could be dealt with. This was meant to provide, kind of a sense of what the magnitude of the benefits of the 3 options are, and to elicit some feedback about, thoughts on those options and, direction to go and develop further options. The direction we received was to come back and develop a more sort of thorough set of options that potentially included the 3 that were presented, but also additional options as well, based on some feedback from the board. And so that is the plan. We are still working through continued analysis of the potential options that are available to us. In addition, any allocation is subject to the approval of the California Public Utilities Commission. And so we are also trying to better understand the timing of their process. And that gets to the bottom of the memo. There's a calendar date. There's a calendar. It sort of works through, from the date of December 2nd, when PG&E filed the advice letter laying out a process for how this allocation could occur, down to when the allocation when EBC would have to take action to accept an allocation. So under the current process, our understanding is that EBC does not have to formally take action to accept an allocation until, as late as May 16th. Would not have to take an allocation until May 1st is when we would have to notify PG&E. So likely our April board meeting would be when we would have to take final action to approve an allocation and what we accept. That means we have some time to understand what our options are, to understand the interplay of an allocation of carbon-free energy as it relates to the budget for the coming year, the interplay perhaps with changes to some of our energy costs and revenue associated with the PCIA. So given the interconnected nature of accepting this allocation and the broader financial implications on the organization, our thought was let's wait until we have some more specific information to share so we can kind of present a more full picture of the allocation. I think one thing that is important to note is that one, this allocation is limited in time. So the filing, so while an allocation could occur beyond 2020, because there's a separate process going on at the Public Utilities Commission for allocating not just carbon-free, but also the renewables that PG&E bought on behalf of customers who are now CCAs. This allocation that PG&E is limited in nature, and I believe would be for 2019 and 2020 only, and a future allocation might occur through the power charge and difference adjustment proceeding for 21 and beyond. So I think that's one point. It is limited to in-state resources that are currently under contract with PG&E, so large hydroelectric and nuclear. It's only available to load-serving entities who are paying the PCIA, so predominantly CCAs, but it also could be available to direct access providers as long as the customer is a PCIA paying customer. And there's flexibility in the allocation to take either one or both of the resource types. So you can take just hydro, you can take just nuclear, you can take hydro and nuclear. There's flexibility there. And then again, in the end, this is all still very much contingent on the California Energy Commission and really the California Public Utilities Commission approving the allocation of resources. As we think about the size, the allocation is potentially quite significant. The allocation could be, for a full year, it could be upwards of 2 gigawatt hours. Now, if the allocation doesn't occur until May or June, however many months have passed, will reduce the allocation. So if it's only 2/3 of the calendar year, you're only going to get 2 terawatt hours. 2,000 is what I meant to say. Yeah. You would get only, 2/3 of the allocation, because you think these units generate as they generate. You can't get it on a backwards looking basis, or at least the rules today don't allow you to be allocated something that's already generated. I think one other point is that the costs of these units are paid for through the PCIA. The reason we're actually thinking, even having a discussion around an allocation of carbon-free, is because the PUC determined when they made the significant changes to the PCIA a little over a year ago that they would not value these carbon-free resources in the context of the PCIA. That could have benefited us because it would have reduced our PCIA. The PUC said, no, there's no value to carbon-free, which we know to not be true because we're going out there and actively paying for carbon-free, but that was their determination. So the compromise we arrived at with the utility was, all right, if it's not worth anything, then allocate it to us, and that will reduce our procurement costs. So instead of having to go out and spend $5, $10, $15, $20 million in incremental procurement costs for carbon-free energy, we will take an allocation and we'll achieve those savings, which then sort of accrues to our bottom line as lower procurement costs and benefits the agency in that way. So that's the memo. I think the plan is as early as January to come back with a more thorough options assessment, take further feedback from the full board on those options, and seek to take action in sort of the February or March timeframe.
Thank you. We have a lot of public speakers, but I do want to see if any of the board members here have any opening or framing comments or questions before we go to the public speakers.
Question.
Councilmember Mandel.
I'm just curious, so the allocation that's being considered from PG&E includes hydro, large hydro, and nuclear, but no renewables. So why aren't there renewables in the mix? Why aren't those part of what we're getting for free, or being offered for free?
So there's an active dialogue with at the PUC about an allocation of the renewables that could occur starting in 2021. That is not a settled matter, though. Part of the issue here has been PG&E has been, and as I've noted before, PG&E has been unwilling to actively go out and market these carbon-free resources. And if they were to have sold them, that would actually have reduced the PCIA that way, because they're generating more revenue, and that revenue offsets their PCIA. But they haven't been selling. They have been selling renewables, so there are numerous opportunities to go and buy renewables, or there are multiple opportunities to go and buy renewables from PG&E on a short-term and long-term basis. So right now they're still dealing with their renewables as sales, and then the revenue from those sales reduces our PCIA. We think we might get an allocation though through the process that would start in 2021. So that's still on the table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Do you have an estimate on when you think the CPUC will take action on this allocation?
So I see my colleague Todd, you probably have a better sense of the specific details of when. I think they have a 60 or 90-day requirement to issue a resolution. Oh, wrong button.
Is that oh, it's red when it's on. That's interesting. Or it's a hot mic, I guess. Yeah, so Todd Edmister, Director of Regulatory Affairs, Deputy General Counsel for EBC. And we have an estimate. It was the table that was in the memo. But that's all that it is, an estimate. The type of filing that PG&E made, it's called an advice letter. It comes in different flavors. This particular version was what's called a Tier 3 advice letter. Okay, that means that it needs a full commission vote in order to be approved and become effective. That in turn entails a 30-day sunshine requirement for whatever the PUC is going to act on. And it also requires that there be an opportunity for public comment, which is at minimum 20 days, effectively 30. So the very fastest the PUC can act on this thing is 60 days from filing, right? So you won't see any action on it really before February 6th, which is the first commission meeting 60 days after the filing. And that's what PG&E's requested. They've asked for action on it in early February. Realistically, just given the time it takes to kind of move everything through the commission's internal process, you would expect to see 3 to 4 months before commission action. So the table that's set out in the memo basically is predicated on I think, a 3-month decision timeline. Probably more detail than you wanted, but that's our best estimate.
Thank you. Mr. Pilch, Senator Pilch.
So I'm looking at the staff report that the executive committee considered, and it says, it is important to note that the amount of allocations offered to EBCE will not change the amount of nuclear or large hydro generated by PG&E. And I don't know if you want to talk about this now or defer that to another meeting, but I think the issue before this board as to whether or not considered the nuclear is whether or not it provides a market for the nuclear. I think that's something that some of us, at least me, would be considering, whether or not if there's nuclear out there that we can grab, but it's going to be decommissioned, okay. But if it's nuclear out there and we're generating a market and we're encouraging more nuclear plants, that's a different story. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is not creating an incremental market for nuclear. We have in California one nuclear power plant. It's the Diablo Canyon Generating Station. It is going to retire in 2020. Half of it will retire in 2024. The second half in 2025. That is, through a federal government process, that retirement has been approved, and that is the timeline that it's on to retire. This, in a way, I think this is best understood as an accounting exercise. Diablo Canyon will generate what it generates for the life of the plant. So for the next 5 years, it'll generate the number of megawatt hours that it generates. And if a CCA takes the allocation, then that reduces the CCA's obligation to go, or that reduces what a CCA would otherwise go out and buy from other carbon-free resources. If the CCA does not take the allocation, then PG&E retains that generation for its customers. And so it changes, it has no implication on the operations of the unit. Because of the structure of the transaction, EBCE, if EBC were to take the allocation and say PG and Diablo Canyon were to stop operating, we're not buying energy from this plant to meet our energy obligations. We are buying it as in a way where we're really just taking the zero carbon attribute, and we're separately buying energy elsewhere. I think that's an important nuance, because if it were to retire more quickly, we're not left with a significant hole in our commodity electricity portfolio. What it would mean is we would have a little bit less, or potentially significantly less carbon-free, and we would have to go and replace it somewhere else. But there are very active markets for carbon-free, and we would go and do that.
Okay, thank you.
2 clarifying questions, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
A clarifying question in regards to the bright choice, and this is unspecified sources of power, about 38%. Would you say that maybe some of that in that mix could be nuclear if we were buying the unspecified already in the mix?
Yeah, I think one way to think about, there is nuclear in the mix today. It's in the system, so it's hard. You can't partition the electrons that come into your house. So when you're buying market energy, there's a certain amount of that is coming from Diablo Canyon. And the power content label is more the accounting for where it is as opposed to what's physically serving the customer. If we were to take an allocation of large hydro or nuclear, it would mean we would likely buy less unspecified energy. Which typically, though, it's the system average, right? So it's largely natural gas, but there may be some nuclear in there.
And in regards to the potential savings of $16 million, say you have the energy through 2020 or through 2024, those savings, those dollars, those $16 million initially, those can be reinvested to procuring cleaner, greener energy and down the pipeline in 2024, 2025. Is that something that
I think that those are funds that it's really up to the board to determine how to use those funds. Those could be used to go out and invest in local programs. Those could be used to provide greater customer discounts. Those could be used to increase the zero carbon content in our energy mix. Those are three options. I'm sure there are other options that can be further considered, and I think that's part of why we want to take a little bit more time to lay out the options in a more sort of detailed fashion for you, the board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor again.
Sharing a microphone here. So in the memo, it talks about an additional $11 million that would be needed if we do not elect to take the content that includes nuclear. Is that an additional $11 million beyond what we've already budgeted, or is that money already budgeted in our operating budget?
Yeah, so our operating budget has not included the allocation. So our budget sort of assumes that did not assume we were going to get any allocation. It sort of just assumes we were going to go out to the market and pay, under this assumption of $8 a megawatt hour. We were going to pay that incremental $11 million. This would result in a reduction. In this scenario, it would be a reduction in our costs that could be used for something else.
However, we're not assuming that we are spending more than what we've already budgeted for carbon-free energy.
Correct. Right.
Okay,
it's not a budget
you.
increase. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering about the comparison. As you go forward, I'd very much like to see comparisons between, sorry, I'm having trouble formulating this. Nuclear is not clean. Neither is natural gas. Neither is a whole bunch of other things. So what are the consequences in terms of the how this plays out in terms of cleanliness, in terms of what are the energy costs and who is hurt by this? So one of the arguments that's been made that I've seen come by is that this is going to have an economic justice impact. My concern is that it will have an economic justice impact by costing more in one. So what are the costs that happen one way or the other with this? And I'm sorry, I'm not framing that. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble with the language at the moment. Sorry.
It's okay. So I think, and I'll just use the option scenarios that were in the executive committee presentation that's linked here. So the implication is if you take the allocation, you reduce your procurement costs. And in this example, if you were to take the full allocation, or put another way, if you were to take the full allocation of the nuclear and the large hydro, you would reduce your procurement costs by $16 million. That is revenue. That's revenue that you are generating that you could put to other uses. Those uses could be buying more renewable energy, so changing your power content for Bright Choice from 85%, increasing that beyond that. It could be for local programs. It could be to increase the discount. Those are options that are available if you were to reduce your procurement costs. To the point about the incrementality, because this is a unit that will generate sort of irrespective of the allocation. In my estimation, there's not a clear specific community impact of taking it. I think, in a sense, if EBC doesn't take it, PG&E's existing customers will take it. So it becomes a matter of, well, the residents of Alameda County are not taking it. That means that residents of places like Stockton and Fresno will have more nuclear in their mix. And they had, in 2018, bundled customers had over 30% of their energy was served by Diablo Canyon. So that's, and so it's just a matter of allocating that resource. And I think when you think about the substitution, if we were to take an allocation of carbon-free, that would likely mean a reduction in we could reduce our purchases of out-of-state large hydro. And that's really what we're talking about substituting, is in-state carbon-free for out-of-state carbon-free. It's not about reducing our renewables purchases. This is about reducing our reliance on out-of-state imports of large hydro.
Thank you, Councilmember Monroe. Yes, Councilmember
Sorry,
Mayor.
just two more questions. I know we have many people that want to speak. So at the executive committee meeting, we had a robust discussion of this proposal, and there was an additional option that was discussed, if you remember, Mr. Chassett.
Yes.
I hope that when this comes back, that will be presented to the board.
Yep, and let me share the fourth option, which was presented, was the idea of taking the allocation and then seeking to sell it. Correct. I believe that was it, right?
So yes, we would not use it, but we
wouldn't let PG&E keep it. And I will say that as you think about the impacts, if PG&E keeps the allocation, it actually increases their carbon-free content. So it makes PG&E's energy mix cleaner than it otherwise would be if not for taking the allocation. But that is a fourth option. Again, that's
clean is a relative term in this case.
Clean is a relative term, absolutely. But I think that the idea is we want to make sure to sort of give that idea, and there's some other ideas that are being worked on, adequate time to be developed. So when we come back, we actually are able to say, for instance, with the sale idea, well, we want to be able to test, is there a market to sell? You know, we don't want to adopt a policy and then come back 2 months later saying, well, sorry, there's not a market to sell. So that's one of the activities that we're pursuing right now, is assessing who might we sell to, what is the potential range of sale opportunities, and we would integrate that into our presentation on that option.
And then a couple of other points. One, I'll speak to this issue after public comment, but my other request would be that when we come back with options, that we analyze these options relative to the goals that were established for this agency as specified in the JPA. There are very specific goals for the establishment of this particular agency, and I think we need to evaluate this in the context of those particular goals. I had another point, but I can't remember what it is. So what is the timetable, Nick, that you intend to come back to the board with?
So I think we're hoping to come back in January. What I'd really like to be able to do is present the options in the context of some of the changes that are happening with the PCIA, because I do think it's useful.
I mean, that was going to be my point. That was going to be my request, is that we are developing an integrated resource plan that's going to be outlining long-term what are our goals in terms of the power content that we're providing our customers. And I think we need to look at this also in the context of the IRP and what are our long-term goals towards increasing the amount of renewable content as well as carbon-free content.
Yep. Yeah. No. Absolutely. But in terms of your timeline question, I think I would like to present this as soon as January, because I think it's useful to present it in the context of the PCIA, and I think we're going to be in a place in January to present on the PCIA, because we expect to have a decision from the PUC on that. But just given that our meeting in January comes we're not that far from the holiday, that I want to make sure that we've given this enough time to be able to do a robust job. So if it could push into February, depending on how quickly we can pull all the disparate pieces of analysis together.
I mean, we have to make a decision with respect to this particular offer, but I do think we need to look holistically at, as we're developing the IRP, about what are our short-term and long-term goals.
And I will say, because of the unique nature of this allocation, it is not incongruous to say we accept this allocation, but we have a policy not to buy nuclear. Because in a way, this is being allocated. While it's technically a sale, it's being allocated at no cost effectively because we paid for it already. You could do that, but also say as a policy, we would never go out and buy energy from another nuclear power plant. So there is a power plant in Arizona, Palo Verde generating station, and we could, as a policy, say we would never go out to buy nuclear from Palo Verde to meet our carbon-free needs. Again, that's why you can do both, because this is sort of this unique circumstance.
Thank you. Okay, let's we'll call the public speakers, and that's me. I'll call them. Okay, I'm going to read your names. And then you could come up in any order, and we give, what do we usually give? Madam Clerk, what do we usually give? 2 minutes or 3 minutes? Madam Clerk?
I'm sorry, it's 3 minutes. It's up to the chair. Regularly it's 3, but are you
1,
shortening
2,
it?
3, 4. I'm gonna ask that we keep it to 2 minutes. If you got to go over a few seconds, that's okay, but try to keep it to 2 minutes. In any order, Michael Kaufman, Seda or Jada Dogan, sorry if I mispronounced that, Tom Kelly, David Gasman, Natalie Nussbaum, Marianne Ferda, sorry if I mispronounced that, Erica Edelson, Jessica Tovar, I assume that is, Jane Kelly, Beth Weinberger, and Barbara Stebbins. Hi.
Hi, my name is Michael Kaufman. I live in Oakland. Thank you all for doing this very important work for clean energy in Alameda County. I rise to speak against nuclear. It's been characterized as clean, which is absurd in my opinion, since we have to worry about thousands of years of toxic effluent from creating this energy from uranium. But my concern is clean as in terms of carbon dioxide. The tremendous amounts of carbon dioxide that is used to produce these nuclear power plants, the tons and tons of cement that is used to produce these nuclear power plants, overwhelm any idea of no carbon dioxide, no gases that produce climate change. So please consider all of the arguments that you have in front of you from the staff on not using nuclear. There are arguments about alienating your customer base, but also consider the fact that huge amounts of greenhouse gases are used in the production, transportation, and the destruction of these nuclear power plants when, for instance, Diablo Canyon closes. How much carbon dioxide will be produced in recycling all of that stuff? Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name's Erica Edelson. I'm an EBCE customer. And I was involved back in the day as an organizer and advocate for creating this program. On behalf, I was representing the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition at the time. And I have to say that never in our wildest dreams did we ever imagine that there would be nuclear in this program's portfolio. I mean, I say that so much so that, like, had it even crossed our minds that it was a possibility, we would have made damn sure that there was language in the JPA to not allow that. And I don't think you would have seen anywhere near the degree of community support that there was that really drove the creation of this program for years if we thought that part of our mix was going to be nuclear. So it really, I was shocked when I found out that this was on the agenda. And in fact, I told a couple neighbors of mine where I was coming tonight, and they didn't believe me. They thought I was joking, which is a little bit of an indication of the kind of PR blowback that I think this program is going to be facing if it moves forward with nuclear. It really, it feels like a betrayal of the mission of the kind of program that we worked so hard to create, and I strongly urge you against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Any of the names I called, any order, come on up.
Hi, I'm David Gasman. I live in Oakland. I'm obviously against having nuclear power in the mix. I understand the attraction of it. My God, we spent a fortune building Diablo Canyon. It takes a fortune to maintain and fuel it, and it will take a fortune to decommission it. And so I understand the logic that says, let's get every bit of electricity we can out of it. I remember the advertising, I would think it's in the early 1960s, about electricity being too cheap to meter. If that had been the case, my work history would have been very different, because for some number of years I maintained the meter history system for PG&E. Obviously, if there had been no meters, there'd have been no meter history system. What I want to suggest to you, and you all know the terrible problems with nuclear power. Michael alluded to some of it. You'll hear more about it today, I'm sure. I suggest to you that nuclear power is illusory. We need to get away from it as quickly as possible and into genuine renewables, solar, wind. You understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Jessica Tovar, East Bay Clean Power. I've said many times that we oppose nuclear energy in East Bay Community Energy's mix. At the moment, and according to the mix that is posted on the website of East Bay Community Energy, there is no nuclear in our mix, and there is in PG&E. I believe it shows like 34%. And actually, I'm really concerned about the public relations, what this looks like to the community, because as you accept this nuclear allotment, those numbers start to move over into East Bay Community Energy, and PG&E starts to position themselves to look as the clean energy front runner, very easily leaving us vulnerable to being said, actually community choice doesn't work. They made promises of being cleaner than PG&E and doing better than the state mandates, yet you'll now see a lot of this dirty stuff in our mix. I think one of the things that you should take very, very seriously is your reputation as trying to be a community-based program that promises to supply clean energy, to invest in local renewables, and this is really taking a huge step backwards. There are efforts right now through the California Public Utilities Commission by the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility to actually negotiate shutting down Diablo Canyon. If we take this nuclear allocation, we are justifying keeping Diablo Canyon open. We are justifying the PCIA. It is more valuable to PG&E to keep taking our money through the PCIA, keep Diablo Canyon open, than it is to move it into decommissioning. So I think you should take this issue very seriously, ask a lot of questions. I think we should think about what this looks like for our program, what this looks like for the state of California, who's been phasing out nuclear. San Onofre was shut down abruptly because of a leak. Are we going to wait until Diablo Canyon starts leaking in order to do something about it?
Thank you, Jessica.
And I just will add that, this is something that affects our health. It threatens really our environment, and we shouldn't be shifting those burdens onto communities and the environment just to make money off of it. That is based in greed. Don't do that.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Beth Weinberger. I'm an Oakland resident, and I also represent Alameda County Kahila Community Synagogue. And I did attend the executive committee meeting where the staff first presented this. And in that fairly comprehensive presentation, the emphasis was on the dollar and cents savings involved. Nowhere did I hear in that quote-unquote cost-benefit analysis any attempt to address the considerable costs associated with the risks of nuclear energy, the problems with nuclear waste, and all of the other problems that have already been mentioned by previous speakers. I think the staff needs to present that as part of its analysis, to be fair. I also want to comment on what Erica said about what you're going to do to your customer base. Do not forget that two of the main cities in this agency, Oakland and Berkeley, have long since voted to be nuclear-free. You are going to lose your customer base when they find out that you are including nuclear energy, regardless of how you choose to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Marianne Ferda. I am a Berkeley resident and a proud member of 350 Bay Area Berkeley Hub. I'm grateful to the EBCE board for being able to speak to this issue and grateful to Mayor Aragon's support for clean nuclear-free energy for our city. I suspect all of us here tonight recognize the climate emergency in which we're living and the challenge we face to meet the ever-growing demand for energy. While nuclear energy is itself free from carbon dioxide emissions, we also all know that it is far from clean, and it's already been discussed, the types of significant risks posed by nuclear energy. Having investigated the background of this issue, I also am aware of the financial incentive for EBCE to accept the nuclear power from PG&E into their mix. And I'm not alone in my desire that EBCE resist this temptation and increase its transparency rather than indulging in the obfuscation that seems to pervade contemporary politics. The climate-concerned citizens who are your customers would like to continue to support your work. Please do not muddy the mix and alienate your community with nuclear energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, directors. I'm Jane Kelly with Kyoto, USA, based in Berkeley. I wanted to express my opposition to the acceptance of nuclear power from PG&E. EBCE was formed by stakeholders who understood that one of the many benefits of an Alameda County-wide community choice program was that it would eliminate nuclear power from the power mix. That understanding was so broadly shared. I was part of the founding of EBCE, of the Community Choice Program. And that understanding was so broadly shared that the steering committee that helped to formulate EBCE's Joint Powers Agreement saw no need to include that prohibition in the founding document. That's in contrast to the issue of using unbundled renewable energy credits that the steering committee specifically limited in the agreement, given its controversial nature. I think it's fair to say that the founding members did not intend to acquire or accept any nuclear power within its energy mix, and to do so now would undermine a significant principle upon which this agency was even established. I'd also like to ask why we would accept something as compensation for the exit fees we've been paying when it turns out that the nuclear power offered has no real value. Mr. Chazet pointed out at a recent ExCom meeting that if we accepted the nuclear allocation and chose not to add it to the power mix, we would likely have to pay someone to take it off our hands. This suggests to me that we can make the case to PG&E and to the CPUC to include other forms of carbon-free power that our exit fees have paid for. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to the names I already called, there are a few other names I'll call. Benjamin, can't tell the last name, Chris Gilbert, David McCord. In addition to those names and names already called, any order?
Thank you. Tom Kelly, Kyoto, USA. Before I start, I just wanted to ask Stephanie if she had received any correspondence from stakeholders throughout the county and expressing their opposition to this nuclear.
Forwarded to the board, and there's also copies in the back.
Oh, great.
And,
because I know the Sierra Club had over 100 letters sent.
I think many of us received emails from a number of people.
Yeah, great. One thing I wanted to clarify too, because I had a sidebar with a board member about what we're actually talking about here. And Nick, interrupt me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about the electricity generated from nuclear power, right? That's what the allocation consists of. Or is it something else?
We are talking about an allocation of power from Diablo Canyon.
Okay, so it's the actual electricity.
So so there's a nuance there, is that we are taking an attribute with power, and the power is being bought and sold at the same time. So your takeaway is an attribute that is then used as a reduction in the requirement to buy other forms of carbon-free energy. And I think that's a fairly common model that's used for buying carbon-free energy across California.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't quite understand that, but it does sound a lot like a renewable energy credit, though. So, Nick, it sounds like a REC in a way, some form of a REC.
Right, so the transaction structure that we're describing here is commonly used for bucket one transact. So if you're buying bucket one renewables, which are California renewables, the structure that's described here is the same structure we would use for buying a bucket one renewable or in-state or out-of-state large hydro. It's a common structure where you buy and sell the commodity because there's variability in when the generation occurs, and because of that variability, it's hard to match when the wind blows, the sun shines, and our consumption. So what we do is we use a buy-sell transaction, and we take the attribute to reduce our carbon content.
Thank you. May I have another minute just to read my prepared? Thank you. I agree with the previous speakers on the many reasons why accepting nuclear power from PG&E is not a good idea. One of my primary concerns about accepting an allocation of nuclear power from PG&E is that doing so could delay the acquisition of more clean renewable power built right here in California, maybe some of it in the East Bay, built by California workers who are supporting California families. PG&E is offering 1,400 gigawatt hours of electricity, which makes up about 22% of EBCE's total load. And if the nuclear can only be applied to Bright Choice, the nuclear power would make up about 25% of that product's mix. And as I understand it, the staff memo, that power wouldn't be delivered until mid-2020, so the entire allocation would come in the last 6 months of that year. I understand the temptation to take what has been characterized as free power, but in light of the incredibly dire climate crisis we are facing, why do that and delay the transition to a power supply that is produced by renewable technologies? We can help to accelerate that transition and not get sidetracked with this offer.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's say no to nuclear power and put our time and energy into moving EBCE to 100% renewable power for all. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
I'm David McCord. I'm the chair of the Sierra Club's San Francisco Bay chapter of Energy and Climate Committee. And we welcome an infusion of carbon-free energy from PG&E. However, we join with other community members in urging you to accept only the hydro power. The Sierra Club has long been opposed to nuclear power due to its proven hazards and disposal problems. And your constituency expects clean, non-nuclear power in all of your offerings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara Stebbins with East Bay Clean Power Alliance. So I think it's pretty clear that Nick Chassett is giving the hard sell for this so that EBCE would accept this allotment. But I am glad this is not an action item today, because I think you really need more information about this offer, including some clarification on some of the things that have been said. The offer is clearly part, or is somehow going to affect negotiations around the PCIA, but we don't really know how it's going to affect those negotiations. So certainly one of the concerns that we would have, even though Nick has said this is a very limited allotment, if in fact this allotment moves forward at the CPUC, is it possible that that will become part of the standard resolution to the PCIA moving forward? So that seems like one big question. Another question is the ratio that of 70%, 30%, how that was determined. I don't see that that's anywhere in the PG&E advice letter. It would be really helpful to know how that ratio is being determined, since of course the community choice advocates in this community are very much opposed to accepting nuclear. But the most important question we have, there is currently a motion by the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility to get Diablo Canyon closed prior to 2025. That is because it's costing customers over $1 billion a year right now in above market costs for that energy. So that's $1 billion. When you work out the numbers, that could save East Bay Community Energy $90 million a year, as opposed to $16 million a year or $11 million that we could potentially save.
Thank you.
So we don't want to see this being used as justification for keeping Diablo Canyon open.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
My name is Chris Gilbert. I'm in Berkeley. I'm a member of the Sierra Club chapter, and I helped put together the letter that you got by email, the letters, hundreds, and also the letter that the chapter sent to you all. But I want to represent actually myself as a customer, an EBCE customer, as one of the first 100 residential ones who was willing to, do the beta version. I can't help but think the name of this is the East Bay Community Energy. It comes from a community, and if you do this nuclear thing, I have a sense that the community is going to feel cut off from you. You will be just an organization making a decision based on money, whereas all the people that spent time putting this together, long before you guys were involved, will be cut off. They'll feel alienated. You'll lose the base of the community of this place. So I say pay attention to the long-term people that have been around a long time and help put this thing together. Thank you.
Thank you. All names were called. Come on up. Anybody else? Okay, yeah, if anybody could get in line, that'd be great. Okay, go ahead, thank you.
Hi, Benjamin Zank, EBCE customer. I think it's important to see if this plan would help PG&E's bottom line at all, if it would help Diablo Canyon's bottom line at all. And if it does, I really hope that you all vote no on the proposal. The board and the program is here to serve the community. we are all incredibly dissatisfied with PG&E, and up until this point have been very happy with this program. And I really hope that that doesn't flip because of this sort of proposal. I see a really beautiful logo up there, which doesn't happen to have any nuclear plants in it. Really, the emphasis should be on these renewable sources. And if this is a way to delay any action and any purchasing of true renewable clean sources, that would be incredibly sad. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Melissa Yu. I'm a community organizer at the Sierra Club. And I just wanted to come to, I was asked by our chapter chair, Igor, to reiterate some of the points. He felt really strongly about this item, but could not be here today. So you all have gotten the letter from our chapter, and we understand that while cost may play a significant role in your consideration of this item, EBC cannot compromise its values because accepting any proposal with nuclear will erode stakeholder and customer trust. We have made good progress thus far building educational awareness, and a decision to accept nuclear can jeopardize much more than the financial gains. And by purchasing nuclear energy from PG&E, EBCE would essentially, like many have said today, betray the reason why the community works so hard to establish an alternative option to PG&E. And you've gotten our 100+ letters and petitions from our members and supporters. So we really respectfully urge you to reject any proposal that includes nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jayda Doğan. I'm an Oakland resident, and I work with Local Clean Energy Alliance. I'm here to say that I'm opposed to the idea of EBC including nuclear in its power mix. And there are many community organizations who are shocked to hear that, like, you are considering this, and hopefully you will vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe those are all names have been called, and everybody has come up to speak. Colleagues, so now it's time to make some additional comments. Remember, we're not taking any action today, but if there is obviously any comments or questions or anything you want to make sure staff hears today, so when they come back a month or two with a fuller staff report, they'll be able to answer those questions in that report. So, Councilmember Mandel.
Thank you. So I too am glad we're not making this decision tonight. I think it's good that we are taking some time to talk about it and listen to each other. I think it's appropriate that this is not something that we rush through. For me, the hydro portion that may be on offer seems like a no-brainer. I didn't hear anybody saying we shouldn't accept the hydro rec, so hopefully that's something that we can all agree we should just do and not waste time debating that one. Right now, the power mix from East Bay Community Energy overall is about 15% natural gas. If you look at our greenhouse gas estimates, it basically comes out to, most of the greenhouse gases are coming from the natural gas component, about 15%. I don't like that, right? I think I would imagine that everyone here could agree that's not a good thing. It's a sort of a necessary evil. It's a choice that we are being forced into. In the short term. I think we can all also agree that over the medium term, I'm hoping in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be 100% greenhouse gas free, no nuclear, no fossil fuels, mostly renewables and hydro. But we can't do that today. We can't do that yet. For the next some number of years, 2, 3, 5, if you're a pessimist, in my opinion, there's going to be some dirty power in our mix. And I think the choice that we, all of us and the board, have before us, and the choice that I think we need to make is, of that portion that has to be dirty because there's not enough of the renewables available at a price that we can afford without charging more than PG&E, of that percentage, that 10 to 15% that's going to be dirty, which is worse, natural gas or nuclear? And I'm not trying to have that debate at the moment, but I think it's a valid question. And I think that where you come down on that question seems to me like the most logical way to guide your decision on whether or not to accept any of the nuclear power. Because if we can accept the nuclear and eliminate natural gas from our mix, if you think that natural gas is worse than nuclear, that's a good thing. If you think that nuclear is worse than natural gas, it's a bad thing, right? But that, I think, is the frame that we should be trying to look at this in. Don't need to settle it tonight. We've got a couple more meetings to talk about it, but I encourage people to think about that. The choice is not between nuclear and 100% renewables. That's not an option. The choice is, in the short term, is between nuclear and natural gas for 10 to 15% of the overall portfolio.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bacon.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief, but I feel like I have a lot to say on this issue. I kind of feel like I'm in a time warp. I was at a Fremont City Council meeting, and they brought up tobacco and how the tobacco industry is trying to, get our youth to get hooked. And I'm like, didn't we solve this issue decades ago? And I feel the exact same way. I'm old enough to where I remember 3 Mile Island. I remember all these things. And I do remember, I've been a Sierra Club activist for a long time, for decades, and I do remember a lot of the debates. There was a very active debate where I think strong environmentalists were arguing that nuclear might be a better option. But I think over time, they lost. And I think we all agree that, we've seen, what is it, Fukushima, it's just not safe, it's not clean. I would disagree a bit that the debate here is between natural gas and nuclear. I think that we have to make a commitment to go clean. And nuclear it would be different if nuclear were a small investment, but has been noted, it's huge. Having to go with, keeping the Diablo Canyon going is just huge. I would like to say one other thing about that. I do bird watching down at Morro Bay and Avila Beach down there, and there's a huge section of the California coast that is just off limits. Our beautiful California coast, that whole area, Diablo Canyon, is just off limits. It's really sad. Anyway, sorry for that tangent. But in general, I think we have to go with clean energy, and nuclear is just, I think, out of the question. And I definitely would agree with the number of speakers who said that we're kind of doing a disservice to the community, because I, as a community member, as an EBCE member who has opted up to the cleanest energy, I do feel betrayed that we would be considering nuclear. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have Mary Sutter, and then we'll go to Mary Arigian.
So the CAC actually discussed this for quite a while on Monday, and we really are advising the board to reject the nuclear allocations, but at the same time really to seek clarification on several issues prior to making a decision. The annotated aspect of the agenda that we provided to you had several questions that I give huge kudos to my colleague Ann Olivia Eldred, who came up with many of these. She did a fair amount of research and came up with a number of these questions that were ones that are kind of outside the box, in my opinion, in terms of ways to think about this. I'm not going to go over all of them. I think you guys have seen them. You can choose to consider them as ones that you feel are useful or not. I do want to point out 2 of them, though, and really it is clarity on how the staff arrived at the dollar value savings that EBC would accrue from that. It was unclear how that 16 and 11 came about, and it would be helpful, at least for the CEC, to see how that occurred. And secondly is the question of how EBCE would attempt to maintain a renewables mix higher than PG&E, if we take this nuclear allocation. It's more, thinking about our power content. So those are 2 of the bigger questions. The one thing that I haven't heard from the folks here that I think is incredibly important, though, is we have many residential customers, but we have also many commercial customers. And we heard very strongly from our commercial member that this was really shocking to hear and very disappointing. Really, they use, and she feels that other business community members use the fact that they are part of EBCE as it's a fact with their marketing. They use their participation in a CCA as a positive talking point with staff, customers, consumers, and other stakeholders. And really, inclusion of nuclear, at least for this particular one, and probably for others, may reduce their desire to continue to market EBCE as positive component of their business. And I think that that's really an important component that we haven't heard about at this point. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so to staff, Mary, you're going to make sure that staff has all the questions and to make sure that those get addressed the best they can in the next staff report. Yeah. Okay. Jesse.
I want to thank everyone for coming this evening and thank all the organizations that have submitted comment letters to us. I particularly want to express my appreciation to the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I thought your letter was very thoughtful and articulating, I think, very legitimate concerns about accepting any portion of nuclear as part of this offer. As the representative of the City of Berkeley to this board, I unequivocally oppose nuclear being part of any power mix that we are providing to our customers. And my city has adopted numerous policies, including a ballot measure to make Berkeley a nuclear-free community. And this would actually go contrary to the actual language of that initiative that the voters approved in 1986. My council also adopted resolutions calling for the closing of Diablo Canyon and the transition to green non-nuclear generation sources. And so I feel like it's my obligation to represent my city and the policies that my city has adopted to say no nuclear under any circumstances. I understand the appeal of it. However, I think the actual long-term cost to the agency, which is what I'm most concerned about, people opting out of East Bay Community Energy and going back to PG&E, and the economic impact of that on our budget is most concerning to me. And we don't know what the actual impact will be, but there will be an impact. When I've had discussed this matter in my city, people were shocked that this was even under consideration. And so I think we really need to think very carefully about what the potential economic impact could be to the agency, what it would mean to our reputation. And if we don't choose any of the options that involve nuclear, I think we should really think very carefully about how we market ourselves and how we differentiate ourselves from PG&E. And so yes, if we don't take this, PG&E will retain it, fine, let PG&E retain it. Let's actually differentiate ourselves and let our customers know why we are better and why the options we're providing to our customers are better. I appreciate that we'll have more discussion, but my position is very clear. I don't think that we should accept nuclear as part of this offer. I support option B, which would ensure that we do accept the large hydro allocation. I think that's reasonable. But I think the overall impact to our reputation, to the potential impact of losing customers and the economic impact that will have to our budget, and just going contrary to the whole mission of this organization, which was to provide a cleaner, greener alternative to PG&E, to be different from PG&E. I think we're going backwards. I think it actually violates the letter and the spirit of the JPA, and I think we should say very clearly that we reject this offer.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I don't have a position on this issue, but I do have some questions that I would like answered when this item comes back. One is I would like staff to address the allegations that accepting the allotment would extend the life of Diablo Canyon. I would also like to have more information on the difference between accepting the carbon-free attributes versus the energy versus both. And finally, Nick, I'd like you to elaborate on what you had talked about regarding the impact of taking these attributes away from PG&E. Thank you.
Thank Thank you. Councilmember Monroe.
I really appreciate those questions. I also want to just remind everybody that we're not actually debating and talking about what we're voting on here. We're asking questions. I also wanted to really, the Community Advisory Committee, love the questions. I don't think I could add to any of them. They're fantastic. You guys did a wonderful job. I had a couple of comments. So we've been talking a lot. I've heard a lot of conversations about what the goal of this was. So I went and, I've got my computer here. I looked it up. So let's see. EBCE is a local electricity supplier in Alameda County, provides cleaner, greener energy at competitive rates to our customers, reinvest earnings back into the community to create local green energy jobs, local programs, and clean energy projects. I wanted just to say that then the question becomes, what is the definition of cleaner and greener? And we've heard at least a couple of definitions of that tonight, and I think that that's what we're going to be looking at going forward. I don't know where I'm going to go because I think we have a lot of questions on the table at the moment, and I'd like to hear those. My biggest concern, though, is that I'm hearing nuclear being portrayed as an unalloyed evil. It is a shibboleth that is beyond the pale. Now, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but when I think look, I come from Livermore. It's kind of the other side of the world from Berkeley. I've been in Berkeley and I've been in Livermore, but I live with people who do actually, they actually are nuclear scientists. So I've picked up a little along the way, and it doesn't scare me in the same way that, frankly, it scares people from other parts of the Bay Area. I also know that it is not necessarily a good thing, and so which is why I want to have more information. My biggest concern with this is that publicity piece, is there a way, should we go forward with saying, oh yeah, sure, let's put this in the mix, to allay some of those fears? Because honestly, if it turns out that it's worse to have natural gas than it is to have nuclear power, and we choose not to have nuclear power because, oh my God, it's nuclear, then what we end up with is actually not serving our best interests. I'm not saying that's what the situation is. Again, there's a lot of questions. But voting against your interests is something we talk about a whole lot. And I'm afraid that that may be where we're going, possibly. I wanted to say one other thing, which is that to the Sierra Club, when I get 100 letters that are identical, it does not actually make me jump up and down and think that you're wonderful. It makes me think, if it's one letter from the Sierra Club with 100 signatures, that makes a difference. But when 100 people send me the identical letter, what it says to me that a lot of people have pushed a button, that doesn't impress me. I come from a grassroots organizing background. That's how I got elected to office. And I've never in my life pushed a button to send a letter without actually having put my own work into it.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one last comment.
Yes, Councilmember Hernandez.
So I do want to thank everybody for coming out this evening because it is important that you're sharing exactly how you feel and your thoughts about how you thought EBCE was going to initially start. But I do feel that we definitely do need a lot more information moving forward, and I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this information. The information is great, and this is where it's an opportunity for all of us to be informed decision makers on behalf of the community. It's good to have the context that nuclear was really something you didn't want to look to in the future. Although we're trying to get to carbon, and I think we need to that path forward to carbon-free. So the carbon-free process, how do we get to zero? Does that include nuclear in the short term? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know the answer to that. That's why I want to make sure I have all the information we can to make sure we have a path forward. I think we're all interested in making sure we are addressing the climate emergency that we're going through to reduce that, how we're heating the planet, and there's a fever on it. So we have to find a way, and what does that mean? Going back to nuclear, having it in the short term, or is it one of the most reliable and less expensive ways to produce energy? Because a lot of residents or community members want to have the lights on. And I think that's one of the efforts we got to make sure we do so, and how we go about that. And that's the other question we have. So I'm looking forward to getting more information and then working with the community and getting their feedback and interest, polling folks like on Nextdoor, other places to hear what they think, so we can make sure we have a representation of everybody in and outside this room. And that's what I always look at: who's in the room, who's outside the room, who's coming to the meetings, who's not coming to meetings, to try and make the most informed decision I can. And knowing that we're from different cities will have different perspectives. So I look forward to getting more information on all options. Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you. Mayor Argy?
Yeah, I think one question that we do need to talk about is, what are the environmental impacts of nuclear energy as well? I mean, we're comparing nuclear energy to natural gas. I agree, natural gas is bad. That's why Berkeley was one of the first cities in the United States to pass an ordinance to phase out natural gas infrastructure. And I'm glad that many other cities are adopting similar legislation, but to think that there is no environmental impact from nuclear energy is not true. That the waste disposal impacts predominantly impacting indigenous communities and communities of color, I mean, these are real issues that we have to talk about. So when we talk about our environmental mission, we have to also look at it in that context as well.
Thank you. I'll say a few words myself. First of all, you heard, Nick, you heard a lot of questions. If anybody has any additional questions that you come up with later on, please email the staff to make sure they get all the questions that you have. And for that matter, anybody in the public wants to ask questions as well, you're welcome to email it to our CEO as well, and they'll put together a comprehensive staff report the best they can. So of all the comments I heard, I think I'm come closest to the Mayor of Berkeley's comments today, and I think our staff was already aware of that. I do want to acknowledge that, as far as we could tell, Diablo nuclear power plant exists, and it's going to exist for a few more years, and it's going to be decommissioned, and that's going to happen on whatever timeline that's going to happen, regardless of what we do here at EBCE. But I think we're all glad, I hope we're all glad, I'm glad it's going to be happening. It's long overdue, so I'm glad it's going to be decommissioned. In terms of our decision process, and we will look at all the questions and the answers to the questions that we can, I'm concerned about a number of things. One, what it's going to look like to our customers, and what, in the short term, additional opt-outs we might likely get because this happens, or because this would happen. And it's hard to predict that. I don't think we can predict that accurately, but it's going to be more than nothing. And so there'll be some loss there that could be hard to make up, even if it's only a short-term allocation on paper or what have you. To come back from that PR nightmare might take years, so it could be a challenge. I think there is a valid question as to where would we get if we reject the nuclear portion of this, which means we would then have to purchase additional electricity. Is that correct? Most likely large hydro.
We would have to buy large hydro, or buy less of something.
Right, okay. And there's a financial, obviously a cost to that, but we all weigh costs and benefits. Just because there's a cost doesn't mean we should do whatever is the cheapest thing to do in the short term. And I also want to ask, as you already acknowledged, what we brought up, the possibility, since this whole exercise is not going to create more generation of nuclear power, but if we took what we're offered, we would be accepting it, and therefore it'd be very clear that part of our mix appears to be nuclear power on paper and otherwise, and that if we were to accept the allocation because someone else will use it if we don't, PG&E will keep it in their mix. If we were to accept it but then sell it off, I'd like to, as you suggested, see what the possibilities are there. Because doing that does not create more generation of nuclear power in the state. We're not adding to the nuclear waste system if we do what I just suggested. We would maintain our mix as nuclear free as it is today, or as much as it is today, and ensure that we might not be in the hole as much money as we would otherwise be if we could sell off some of it at least, sell it all off at some price, maybe not the market price, but some price, and that would save us money compared to the other option. So I don't know if that's feasible, but I do know that I don't want us to add any nuclear power beyond what may be negligibly in the unspecified sources of power mix. I don't want to add any more, certainly not itemized, which this would be. So I'm hoping we find a way to do it, I hope we find a way to move forward without accepting the nuclear, or without keeping it if we do accept it and sell it off so it's not part of our mix. Okay, I think we've heard a lot of questions, a lot of very, very helpful comments. Thank you all for being here today. And there's no action on this today, so thank you again. The next meeting, we have more items on the agenda tonight, but the next meeting where this might come up will be January 22nd. So just to put it on your calendar, January 22nd, same time, same location. The agenda will come out in advance, so you'll know whether or not it's on the agenda for that next meeting. Thank you again for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Okay, and we're going to move now to agenda item 11. And did the clerk pass out the...
They're in the back. I need to get.
oh, yes, we need to
item
pass
12.
out to all those on here.
Oh, agenda item, yes, 11.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so this is, oops, hold on. Get to the right place in the agenda here. Okay, this is agenda item 11. This is our, what will generally be an annual modification to our annual contract to our contract for the CEO. The executive committee of the board conducted a performance evaluation. Those details are not part of the public's public item here, but I will say in general, the reactions and feedback and performance was is very positive, and the board was in general agreement of that. So we are proposing to amend the contract. And that is as follows on this agenda, on this item here. He will receive, if approved, he will receive a 6% salary adjustment up, 6% salary adjustment up. And in addition to that, to make sure that that is retroactive to his anniversary date, there's an additional one-time money to catch up, to make sure we catch up and he doesn't lose any money because of the delay in approving this. And then the contract will also have the option of this board allowing him to get up to a 7% bonus next year based on his performance for this fiscal year that we're in now. And that would be decided when we do the evaluation next year. There are, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Attorney, but there are no other changes to this document, is that right?
That's correct. As you'll recall, the Brown Act requires that we make an oral announcement stating the salary, so I'm just going to state the actual dollar amounts and also briefly describe the benefits impacts.
Go ahead.
So the salary will be $318,000 with a one-time bonus of $2,367.12, again reflecting the delay. He will be eligible for a 7% merit bonus based on performance evaluation.
Up to 7%.
What's that?
Up to 7%.
Up to, correct. Furthermore, there's a couple of additional changes to the contract that just state that the CEO will be eligible for the same vacation benefits and retirement benefits as other EBCE employees.
Okay. I don't think there are any other questions. Any other questions or comments? We've discussed this through the executive committee multiple times, and I believe the board discussed it briefly in closed session last month, as we were allowed to do as a personnel matter. So let's see any questions. I don't think there's any public comment on this item, so I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Monroe, seconded by Bacon. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any objections or abstentions? Okay, that's adopted unanimously of all those who are present for this item, Madam Clerk. And thank you, Nick, for your good work in bringing this agency forward. I really appreciate that very much. Obviously, we have a lot more work to do, but you're doing a good job, and we appreciate you and the entire EBCE staff for their good hard work. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to item 12.
Item 12 is an amendment to the Barclays revolving credit facility. Let me just note that there are a couple corrections to the interest cost calculations that I'll go over in detail as I speak to the fiscal impact. But item 12 is an action item. We're seeking approval to adopt the resolution authorizing the CEO to execute an amendment to the revolving credit facility with Barclays Bank to increase the cash borrowing capacity as well as to increase the letter of credit capacity. Currently, EBC has a $50 million credit facility with Barclays Bank that was executed on March 15th, 2018, and then was further amended in August 1st, 2019. That facility has a cash borrowing capacity of $25 million and a letter of credit capacity of $30 million. What we're proposing now is to increase that facility from $50 million to $80 million, and those underlying sublimits would be $60 million for cash and $35 million of LC capacity. Obviously, if you add those numbers up, it does exceed the $80 million total credit facility amount, so those sublimits are allowed to be a little bit higher to give us more flexibility in usage. We're recommending this now because market conditions are pretty favorable to get good rates, and it allows, while we don't intend to draw on the facility, it does provide EBC with additional working capital in the case it's needed. And it also helps to improve our cash liquidity metrics in light of looking at potential credit rating processes and such. So beneficial in that regard. The changes other than size are also related to the cash borrowing rate. So we currently have a LIBOR plus 2.5% borrowing rate for the facility. That would be maintained for the first $25 million of the draw if we were to make a draw. And then for any draws above $25 million, that would increase by 15 bips. So that would increase to LIBOR plus 2.65% as opposed to 2.5%. So that would be a modest increase if we were to indeed utilize the facility, basically. The LC rate remains the same at 1.75%, and the undrawn commitment fee remains the same at 0.95% as well. The other change to highlight is the reserves at the outset would remain at $7 million, but to the extent we draw on the facility, there's an increase in that reserve requirement at a rate of 10% of the outstanding balance above $25 million. So in essence, if we draw and utilize the facility, then we have to put a little bit more into our reserves. That maximum reserve amount would total $3.5 million on top of the existing $7 million. Let me detail the actual cost aspects. So, and this is where there are some corrections. So with a maximum draw of $80 million, if we were to draw on that and keep it outstanding for the duration of the contract, so that would be, and sorry, one additional detail. So the amendment would also extend the facilities.
I'm sorry, Howard. If you're correcting amendments on the actual thing we're voting on, can you tell us what page or paragraph that's on?
Oh, yes, I will. And before I do that, let me just provide one other detail that I forgot to mention, is that the tenor of the facility would be 3 years from the time of execution of the amendment. So this facility was anticipated to expire in 2021, so May of 2021. And so this would be a slight extension of that. It would be 3 years at the time of this execution, which we're anticipating to be sometime in the next couple of weeks. So that would go until end of December 2022. So roughly 18, 19-month extension. The details that I'll correct here are under the fiscal impact section, subsection D. Before getting to that, I will just highlight again, the LC cost remains the same at 1.75%. The drawn spread for the first $25 million is LIBOR plus 2.5%. For any draws above $25 million, that would be at LIBOR plus 2.65%. And the commitment fee is 0.95%. Anticipated finance charges and fees just associated with the closing are up to $75,000, though I do expect them to come in under that based off of the legal expenses that we're seeing so far. And the maximum gross proceeds are $80 million if we were to fully utilize the facility. Under subsection D, A, I'll note that the corrections here are related to the inclusion of the LIBOR funding rate, which we made a mistake and didn't include in these initial calculations. So if we were to draw on the $80 million facility for the full life 3-year extension of the facility, and then for the letter of credit facility, which based off the prior amendment was a 5-year term. So if we were to also draw on the maximum letter of credit amount from that point forward until the expiration of the LC facility, the total costs associated with that are 11 million. Let me just make sure I have that correct so I don't misstate it now. The total is $14,300,000 approximately. And so with the principal amount, that $14,300,000 plus the $80 million, that would be $94,300,000. So again, that would represent a maximum utilization of the facility in all regards, fully drawing the $80 million for 3 years, and then further extending, issuing an LC, drawing on the LC, not reimbursing that LC, so basically keeping that amount outstanding to the full life of the LC facility as well. That amount is $14,300,000. So that is the correction under DA. Under DB, there's a similar correction there, again, incorporating the LIBOR funding component of it. In that case, the example that we've presented here is if we were to draw $10 million from this facility out of the $80 million, we keep that outstanding for 3 years, which is the full life of the cash facility. And then similarly, we issue $10 million out of the LC facility. We sort of draw on that and don't reimburse it, so have the maximum interest related to that $10 million. That amount totals $4,170,000 approximately. And of course, there is an undrawn commitment fee that's associated with that number as well. So with that, I will seek approval from the board to allow for the amendment and the CEO to go ahead and execute the amendment with Barclays.
Colleagues, any questions or comments? Councilmember Pilch, or is it Mayor Pilch?
It is Mayor.
Mayor
Thank
Pilch.
you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So a quick question, and apologies to my fellow directors that I have to leave early. Do we have any short or any plans to draw this money, or are we simply taking advantage of favorable conditions to make our option better?
We do not have a specific plan to draw on these funds. It really is driven by what we believe are favorable market conditions to secure this, and we think in the future this facility will have value to us, particularly as it pertains to seeking an investment-grade credit rating. And so I think the timing is driven, the need is driven by the future seeking of our credit rating. The timing is driven by market conditions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't think we have any speakers. No. Okay. Any other questions or comments, colleagues? Okay. So I can entertain a motion as proposed to be as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Who moved? Councilmember Hernandez from San Leandro. Councilmember Mandela from Hayward. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, that's unanimous for all those present for this item. And we'll move on to the next item, item 13.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. I'm Jason Bartlett, the finance manager for EBCE, and we're asking for the board to authorize the extension, or to authorize the CEO to extend our contract with our accountant for an additional year through December of 2020. In April of 2018, the board agreed that we could enter into a 2-year contract with an accounting agency. An RFP, we selected Maher Accountancy, based primarily because they had excellent rates and they have extensive experience with CCA accounting specifically. During the 19 months that we've been working with them, they've assisted with 2 audits and have performed exceptionally well in managing our books and ledgers and providing reports on a timely basis. We are seeking to renew this, to extend the contract at this time rather than in June, because we would like to establish a pattern of where we stagger it with possible future selections of the auditor. While these 2 positions are independent, it is important that we're not transitioning an accountant at the time an audit is beginning. And so the fiscal impact of extending this contract through December 2020 is about $200,000. It includes a monthly fixed rate of $13,250, a one-time additional audit assistance charge of $15,000, and plus a contingency. And so we ask that you allow the CEO to approve this extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no public speakers on this item. Any comments or questions?
So I'll move the item and just say that it probably could have been on the consent calendar for next time around. So.
Yep. Okay. Any second on this? It's been seconded over here by Mr. Hernandez from San Leandro. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Objections or abstentions? Seeing none, that's adopted unanimously of all those present. And we'll move to the next item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 14 is related to our reserve fund allocation. While this is noted as an action item, we actually intended this to be more of an informational item. It's more factual than anything else, but obviously if the board is so moved to vote and accept it, that works as well. After completing our fiscal year and completing our audit process and allowing our sort of cash process to catch up with our accrual accounting, now is a good time to formally allocate funds towards our reserve. As a reminder, on June 20th, 2018, the board approved a resolution that adopted a financial reserve policy, provided a excerpt of that, which is the sort of table that's listed in the memo that lays out the 4 different reserve buckets. The operating/credit reserve is the first bucket. Then there's the rate stabilization bucket, the collateral bucket, and the local development bucket. And you can see in that table, of course, there is a waterfall that's laid out that identifies a minimum annual contribution as well as a maximum annual contribution. So in summary, based off of the audited financials that we recently presented for 2018 to 2019, which had total revenues of approximately $387 million. If you were to look at the minimum and the maximum reserve fund allocation, that would range between 7% and 16% of revenues, which ranges from approximately $27 million to $62 million. So when we look at the balance sheet of what actual cash we have to put towards a reserve, we took a fairly industry standard approach working with our accountant to look at our balance sheet to do that. We looked at short-term assets, which was cash and equivalents, of course, looking at accounts receivable as well as accrued revenue. And that totals about $110 million. And then you subtract out our total liabilities, and that gives us an unrestricted available sort of cash amount for reserves of about $40,500,000 approximately. And so if you put that amount through that waterfall, we hit all of the minimum amounts, and then we don't hit all of the maximum amounts. We get partially through the sort of second round for the operating credit reserve. And so the total line item allocation would be $32,768,000 for the operating credit reserve. For rate stabilization, we would be just a little shy of $2 million. For the collateral account, we'd also be just a little bit shy of $2 million. And then the local development, we'd be at about $3.9 million. And that totals the $40,500,000 that kind of ripples through that waterfall.
Thank you. So our staff is not asking for us to adopt anything? This is happening? This is happening?
This is happening, yes, correct.
Yeah. Based on our current policy?
That's correct.
We're not looking to change the policy today?
That's right.
So this is really just an informational update here?
That is correct.
Okay, great. We have no comments on this item. Any questions, colleagues? Yes, Mary.
I have a question. I've been looking back at the last month's kind of financial stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me understand where I would find what the total amount is in each of these funds? This is the ending balance as of this year in terms of what was put in via the policy, but where do we know how much is actually in the fund?
So for clarification, this is the first reserve allocation that we've done. Yes,
okay.
So there is no other amounts. This is in totality, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
But next year, we'll certainly have more to add into it, hopefully.
Thank you. Okay, you have a question? Yes, go ahead.
A clarification. These are not lockbox accounts. It's not like the money is there and completely restricted. If we ran into a financial crunch and needed to move money around, the board has the authority to do so, correct?
That's correct. Right. The board has authority to do that. So they're not in a controlled account where, River City, our bank, has any discretion, or I shouldn't say discretion, but controls that they're managing. However, I think we should view these as heavily restricted funds.
Agreed.
And certainly the credit rating agencies would view it that way.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for that information. I'm glad we have the funds to meet some of our reserved desires and needs. That's important. And we'll move to the next item, please. Item 15.
Item 15 is an update on the power charge indifference adjustment. This is also an informational item, but we felt like it was important to provide some context of sort of what's happening and prepare you for the more in-depth review of financial impacts that we expect to come in a month.
I'll give Stephanie a moment to pull up the slide deck. I'm astonished that not everybody wanted to hang around to learn more about the PCIA late on a Wednesday evening. While we're getting it up, so the objective for me with you all here today is to give you a bit of a firmer grounding in the operation of the power charge indifference adjustment, or the PCIA. We talk a lot about it, but not necessarily everybody here is really up to speed on how it operates. And so I invite you, as we go through this presentation, which will be fairly high level, to please feel free to ask questions. The idea here is to be interactive and explain to you guys how this works. It's particularly timely because as we come to the end of this year, we're approaching a PUC decision that will set the PCIA for next year. And as we'll go into in a bit more detail here, PCIA is going to go up substantially. So we wanted to alert you to that. And also that there will be undoubtedly further administrative litigation before the PUC in the course of next year over how to manage the implications from the rises that we're expected to see coming out of the proposals that PG&E has made this year and the associated litigation that we've been engaging with them in, and that is still ongoing. All right, so we've got the slide deck here. I'm going to go ahead and dive in. So the first slide here is really the foundational structure for the PCIA, and I'll kind of be jumping back to this as we go through the PCIA in somewhat more detail. It's a simple equation, but there are some really profound implications of this for how we view the proposals that PG&E makes in connection with the PCIA and how we in turn respond to those. The basic idea behind the PCIA is that, well, let me back up a moment. So our organic statute, AB 117, all right, that's the statute the legislature adopted back in 2002 that created community choice aggregators. But along with the creation of CCAs, it provided expressly for the collection by the incumbent utility of certain types of costs from departed customers. Okay, and those are detailed in Public Utilities Code section 366.2F. It also generically expressed a legislative intent to avoid cost shifts between the customers that were leaving the incumbent utility and the customers that remain behind, what we call the bundled customers, okay, in this case, the customers that remain with PG&E. And so this equation represents the way that the Public Utilities Commission has operationalized those dictates from AB 117. Okay, so the PCIA is essentially a means for recovering stranded costs left behind with utilities when customers depart. It's also a way for avoiding cost shifts between departed and bundled customers. How does it function? Well, basically, you've got two streams of money that you're looking at. You have a cost stream. It's reflected here. That's the total portfolio cost. What does all of the stuff that's in PG&E's generation portfolio cost to own, to operate, or to pay out through power purchase agreements, all right? So in the total portfolio cost, you have things like Diablo Canyon. You have the costs associated with the relatively small but not insignificant PG&E gas portfolios. Plants like Humboldt, which is this bizarre reciprocating engine plant, pilot plant, but very expensive, still in operation. Plants like Gateway, relatively modern combined cycle gas plant. All of the costs associated with those plants go here into the total portfolio cost. Also included here are the costs of things like the older, now significantly above market RPS contracts vintage 2008, 2009, 2010. Okay? So all of that goes into the cost side of the equation. Also coming in is what's in the central circle there, portfolio market value. Okay, that's essentially an offset to the costs. So that breaks down further into two separate streams, okay? There's the money that PG&E actually receives for the stuff that's in its portfolio that it sells. So if it sells RPS to us, as Nick alluded to earlier, PG&E's been making RPS available for sale. That's a revenue that feeds into the total portfolio market value. The other component to this that's harder to value is the stuff that they hang on to serve their bundled customers. We call that untransacted, all right? So how do you assign a value to that? The PUC has developed a mechanism for that. Comes out of the decision from the end of last year that was very controversial. I won't go into details here now. If somebody's got real stamina and a high threshold for boredom, I'm happy to discuss it with you after the meeting. But basically, this includes both the costs, both the value for what they sell and the valuation that occurs as a result of this PUC-approved mechanism from last October. You take the total portfolio cost as an amount of dollars, you subtract out the value, which is this mix of administratively determined value plus actual dollars in, you end up with what's called the indifference amount. The nomenclature here comes out of AB 117, 366.2, right? The theory here is that the amount that comes out of this equation is the amount that keeps the bundled and the unbundled customers indifferent to the bundled customers staying behind, the unbundled customers leaving. Right, so that's the basic structure. The insight to get here, though, is these things move in the opposite way that you might normally think of when you think of kind of impacts of market shifts, right? The portfolio market value, it is inversely correlated to energy prices. So as energy gets cheaper, which we normally think of as a good thing, the market value goes down. And as the market value goes down, all else being equal, the indifference amount goes up. Right? Conversely, if the market value goes up, as the prices go up, the market value goes up as well, indifference amount goes down. So in PCIA land, things are turned on their heads, okay? From PCIA perspective, lower prices are actually a bad thing insofar as they increase the PCIA. And conversely, high prices are actually a good thing. They increase the portfolio market value and decrease the indifference amount, thereby decreasing the PCIA rates. It's sort of bizarro land. But it's definitely important to bear in mind when we turn to our next slide. This is a forecast of the increases that we are expecting to see in the PCIA rate for 2020. All right, so to break this down a little bit, you see two columns on the far right there. You see the PG&E proposal column, you see the with CCA changes column. Over on the left, you'll see vintages, 2017, 2018 vintages, all right? So vintaging basically reflects that when CCA customers leave the utility, they shouldn't be on the hook for procurement decisions that the utility makes subsequent to the customers leaving. So your vintage kind of determines which universe of utility costs you're on the hook for. 2017 and 18 are relevant to us because those are the vintages that we have for our customers. The PG&E proposal column, that reflects the increase in the PCIA that PG&E has asked for in its most recent CPUC filing. So what PG&E is asking for here is essentially a 2 cent per kilowatt hour increase in the PCIA rate over the prior year's rates. The column on the far right there, that reflects where the increase would be if all of the changes that CCA parties at the PUC have requested are adopted by the PUC in the administrative litigation that's going on around PG&E's rate increase. So these represent essentially the bookends on the level of cost increase, rate increase that we might see in the PCIA coming out of the current litigation over PG&E's rate request. Right, with one important caveat that we're going to get to next. Okay, that's the cap. So the rate increases that we're seeing here are reflective of this decision that came out of the PUC at the end of last year that significantly changed how PCIA is calculated. We knew at the time that those changes were largely not favorable to CCAs, and you may remember there was a lot of controversy around the PUC's adoption of those changes. What we're seeing here is essentially the other shoe dropping as a result of the changes the PUC adopted back in October. This is the implementation of that universe of changes. One of the things that did come out of that decision that was helpful for CCAs, however, was a cap on the extent to which the rates could increase. And so while PG&E is, I'll hark back to the slide for a minute, while PG&E has asked for essentially a 2 cent per kWh increase in the PCI rate, per that PUC decision from the end of last year, the highest increase that we can see in the rate is a ½ cent per kWh per year. So while the nominal increase PG&E has requested is roughly 4 times ½ cent, the highest increase that we can see, at least for some period of time, and we'll get to that next, is a ½ cent per kWh per year. Before I talk about some further limits on the cap, let me just turn to sort of why we're seeing the changes that we're seeing. And there are really 3 major drivers behind this requested increase. One is that the utility generation costs increased, whereas this is essentially Diablo Canyon. All right, the PUC, when it adopted its decision back in January of 2018, when it adopted its decision closing Diablo, it included some significant additional costs, basically to keep employees around. So there was a pension bump, and then there was a retention bonus plan that the commission adopted. That's about $150 million worth of the increase that we're seeing in the PCIA costs for next year. Dan, yes?
Can I ask a question? So isn't the theory of the PCIA is PG&E had a bunch of contracts signed, longer-term contracts that were already signed and in progress, and so they lose the load, they still have the contracts, we have to take up part of that. Isn't that's the broad theory, is that right?
That's a part of it, yeah. So the costs are made up of two universes of assets. There's the long-term PPAs, which you're referring to, right? So those older contracts, let's say they enter into a contract at $100 per megawatt hour, they can only sell the energy from the contract for $40 a megawatt hour. They've got a $60 stranded cost for every megawatt hour they sell, right? But that's not quite how it's calculated. So the way it works is that $100 per megawatt hour goes into the cost stream, the hypothetical 40 goes into the value, and they're netted out eventually in the aggregate. But it's not just the PPAs. It's also the utility-owned generation assets. So the utility-owned generation assets, Diablo, for example, are also above market. And they factor into this as well, which harks back to our discussion around the allocation, right? When we say we're already paying for this or our customers are already paying for it, this is how they're paying for it. All of the costs associated with Diablo are going into that cost bubble in that first graphic.
Can I suggest that for the board here, we try and stay at a high level and not get too bogged down in those details, which I am not going to be able to follow. So if you could stick at the high level, that would be appreciated.
Yeah. All right, so three major reasons why we're seeing a PCIA increase for next year. Okay, so UOG cost increase, this is the Diablo increase that we're talking about here. The others, the utility forecasts were off. It turned out that power prices were lower than the utility was expecting. Again, going back to that first graphic, if you have lower prices, then the portfolio is worth less, and your difference adjustment goes up, your PCIA goes up. It turned out that power prices were below what PG&E was expecting, so they undercollected. Now they're going to take that back through a true-up, again, an outgrowth of this decision from last year. And then again, third bullet, there were some one-time changes, also attributable to the methodological changes from the end of last year that change how the rates are calculated, and that's another roughly $180 million in increases, all flowing through to the rates. As you will have gleaned from that earlier table, where with the CCA changes, the rate increase was roughly half of what PG&E is requesting. We are, along with a consortium of other Northern California CCAs, fighting the increase. As you'll see here, we're asking for a reduction in the indifference adjustment of roughly $400 million, which should bring rates down significantly. That's before the PUC. We expect that will go up for a vote on February 6th. Right now, it's always a little bit up in the air. You never know quite sure when they're going to act, but that would be the earliest that they could act at this point, given their sunshine requirements. The other bullet here, which takes us to the next slide, is that we do have a cap, but even with the cap, there's what's called the trigger. So one of the side effects of the cap is that PG&E will, for some period of time, be collecting less than the amount that it's authorized to recover. All right, that amount builds up, and so the Commission, in the same decision adopting the cap, contemplated a mechanism for both stopping the buildup of that undercollected amount and also clawing a portion of it back. That's called the trigger. So if as a result of the cap, PG&E ends up short a certain amount of money, then PG&E can say, hey, Commission, we need to raise our rates now so that we're no longer building up that undercollected amount. In fact, we're starting to draw it down. Now, exactly what that looks like is very much in question. The decision from October gave some general guidelines around what the Commission said it would like to see, and also set the trigger thresholds, but that's about as far as they went. So what that will look like is still very much in question, and I'm sure will be a hot topic for further litigation over the course of next year. And that's it.
So if I could, do you mind?
I have another question, but then go ahead. So the PCIA Phase 2 proceeding is still underway, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So are there issues that are yet to be decided that, once they're decided, could change the formula, the structure, the results of this upcoming decision? Or would that not happen until a year later, or what?
Yeah, not for 2020. There are activities underway that could shift things significantly for 2021. So probably the biggest one relates to the allocation methodology. I think Nick alluded to this earlier, that we are very likely to see a proposal coming out of Phase 2 of the PCIA proceeding that would include allocations not just of the GHG free, but also of the entirety of the utilities RPS portfolio as well. So with that would probably come a change in how you do the valuation for the portfolio. They kind of go hand in hand, but that would not go into effect until 2021 at the earliest.
Thank you. I'll just say for the record, as I've said before, I think allowing them to include utility-owned generation in this whole pass-through or this whole allocation, I think is nuts, and I think that's totally unfair. And it's the mentality of the PUC that thinks PG&E deserves a certain minimum return or minimum. They treat PG&E in a way that is antiquated, and I think the fact that they included utility-owned generation, this is just an indicator that they haven't grown away from that yet. So, what can we do? All right, thank you for the presentation. I think we have more questions.
It was probably a rhetorical question, but what we have done is we have raised on rehearing the argument that utility-owned generation was not included as one of the statutorily authorized forms of costs they could recover. That rehearing application is currently pending before the PUC.
Yeah, and it's their generation. They could put it on the market. They could sell it. They have all sorts of options. They don't need to have a guaranteed having us have our customers pay this charge. So anyway, yes, we all know that. Go ahead, Mr. Mendel.
So I agree with you. And just sticking with the bottom line here, because you didn't really hit it, the headline, as I understand it. 6 terawatt hours per year is about what we provide, half a cent per kilowatt hour difference. If my math is right, that's a $30 million hit per year to our bottom line. Did I do that?
Assuming
the cap is
if
what
the
gets
cap,
implemented.
that's right. But if you not hit the cap, and if you look at sort of the bid-ask spread between what we're, no cap, then it's 60 million. If we get everything we're asking for, and if they're getting everything they ask for, it's north of $100 million.
Like that, yeah. Which would wipe out all of our reserves pretty quick. Potentially.
Would that lead to us having to reevaluate our rate structure and policy?
So I would say in January, when we have more clarity on the likelihood outcomes, I think we will be coming back with a discussion of potential revenue impacts of the PCIA change, and that is, frankly, one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss it in the context of the allocation, because taking an allocation, whatever we were to take, represents a strategy to mitigate some of those cost impacts.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
I have
Yes, go ahead, Mary.
two quick ones. When you're talking about if they undercollect the PG&E can raise rates, I'm assuming you're saying PCI rates?
Correct, yes, PCI rates.
And the question I have is, if the choice to put the $150 million to keep the Diablo Canyon workers there occurred in 2019 and our vintage is 2018, why is that hitting our PCIA?
The decision occurred in 2018, but why it's hitting our PCIA is because the asset is dated earlier vintage.
It's just bundled with the asset?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing, there's no action on this item, right? No. Okay. Thank you for the not so good news, but important news for us to know. Appreciate it. We won't shoot the messenger. Okay. We'll move on to the next item.
That was the last item.
A member announcements or goodwill besides happy holidays to all? Okay, seeing none, thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful, safe, happy holiday, and we'll see you in January. Thank you. We're adjourned.